Earth had never seen a broadcast like this before. The screen flickered, interrupted by static before stabilizing. Millions watched as Victor Kane, Earth's leading diplomat and humanity's greatest hope for peace, knelt on a cold metal floor. Blood dripped from his face, a deep gash above his brow. Behind him stood Krozkan, the Dravik overlord, a monstrous figure with obsidian armor and glowing red eyes. His jagged teeth twisted into a grin. "People of Earth," Krozkan's guttural voice boomed across the broadcast. "You send this insect to negotiate? Pathetic." Victor's face was calm, his eyes locked on the camera as if pleading with Earth not to retaliate. "This isn't what you want," he said, voice strained. "There's a path for peace." Krozkan grabbed Victor's hair and wrenched his head back. "Your peace is weakness." Then it happened. The Overlord's blade, a curved, blackened sword, slashed across Victor's throat. Blood sprayed across the cold steel floor. The feed cut to static. The world watched in stunned silence. Jason Kane had been in a bar when the broadcast played. He didn't speak. He didn't move. His whiskey glass remained half full on the counter as people around him gasped and murmured in horror. Jason's fingers dug into the table so tightly his knuckles went white. "Turn it off," someone whispered. Jason's vision blurred. The glass in his hand shattered. He didn't notice the blood on his palm. Hours later, Jason sat in his father's empty home. His mother hadn't spoken a word since she arrived, silently mourning in her own way. On the table sat a leather journal, his father's. Jason flipped through the pages, finding neat handwriting scrawled across each page. Strategies, theories on alien politics, negotiation tactics. At the end of the journal was a single sentence, hastily written. "If this fails, there's only one way to stop them." Jason knew exactly what his father had meant. No one believed he could pull it off. Earth's leaders held emergency meetings, unsure how to respond. "We can't risk war," they said. "We'll try to negotiate with other factions." Jason knew better. He knew that Krozkan wasn't the type to listen. He knew that without action, Earth would eventually fall under Dravik control. The first person Jason turned to was Sasha Vex, a hacker known for defrauding major corporations and humiliating corrupt politicians. Sasha barely looked up when Jason approached her in her cluttered, neon-lit apartment. "Your dad's dead." "I know. The whole planet knows," Sasha muttered, sipping energy drink from a dented can. "I need your help," Jason said. Sasha didn't even blink. "You want revenge?" "I want justice," Jason corrected, though even he didn't believe it. "That's just revenge with extra steps," Sasha muttered. "I'm in." The next recruit was Borges, an ex-Dravik defector. His towering figure barely fit through the door when Jason approached him in a shadowy weapons shop on the outskirts of the city. Borges didn't speak much, but when Jason mentioned Krozkan's name, Borges's lip curled in rage. "He took everything from me," the Dravik growled. "I'm in." Last came Dr. Lyle, a panicked, jittery scientist who had once worked on Earth's defense systems. Jason found Lyle holed up in a basement lab, surrounded by wires and unfinished inventions. Lyle initially refused, terrified of going against the Dravik Empire. "I'm not suicidal," he said. "I'm not." "Then stay here," Jason interrupted. "Stay here and wait until they come for us all." Lyle paused, looked at the bloodied photo of his family tucked in his wallet, and sighed. "I'm in." The plan was reckless. The Dravik's flagship, the Devourer, was the size of a city, equipped with weapons powerful enough to cripple entire continents. Krozkan rarely left the mothership, ensuring he was heavily guarded. The only way to get close was to pretend to be a supply team delivering rare minerals, valuable enough to gain access to restricted areas. Sasha forged identification codes, Borges gathered stolen Dravik weapons, and Lau prepared EMP devices that could knock out surveillance systems for brief windows. When they'd boarded the Devourer, the tension was suffocating. Dravik soldiers, armored in gleaming steel, barely glanced at their team as they unloaded crates. The smell of oil and scorched metal filled the air. Sasha whispered jokes to herself to stay calm, while Borges clenched his fists tightly enough to dent the crates. They navigated through the twisting corridors, placing EMP devices at key points. "We've got 6 minutes," Lyle stammered after activating the first device. Their path to the command deck was clear, until it wasn't. A Dravik guard, one far sharper than the others, halted them just before the final door. "What's in the crate?" the guard barked. "Rare crystalline elements," Jason answered smoothly. The guard stepped closer, his clawed fingers twitching toward his weapon. "Open it!" Jason's fingers hovered over his pistol. "I'd really prefer not to." The guard's hand snapped toward his weapon. Borges reacted first. His fist smashed the guard's faceplate, shattering it with a sickening crunch. The soldier hit the floor unconscious. Sasha shot Jason a look. "Yeah, we're subtle," she muttered. They reached the command deck to find Krozkan standing in front of a massive holographic projection. Earth rotated slowly in the display, red markings highlighting key strategic points. Krozkan turned, his jagged teeth twisting into a grin. "I wondered when you'd come," the overlord sneered. "You murdered my father," Jason growled. "Your father begged." Krozkan laughed. "He pleaded for mercy." "Pathetic." Jason's gun fired before Krozkan finished speaking. The overlord sidestepped effortlessly. Blades unfolded from his gauntlets as he charged forward. The room erupted in chaos. Sasha scrambled to hack the ship's controls, Borges tackled Krozkan's guards, and Lau fumbled with a detonator switch for the explosives they had planted. Krozkan's blade slashed across Jason's arm, tearing through flesh. Jason grunted in pain, but he refused to fall. He grabbed a shard of broken metal from the floor and rammed it into the overlord's side. Krozkan staggered back, roaring in fury. "Get us out of here!" Jason shouted. Lyle triggered the explosives. The ship's core erupted in fire, alarms blaring. The team barely escaped into the docking bay, sealing the door just as a fireball consumed the hallway behind them. Jason collapsed against the ship's wall, panting. Sasha stared at him in disbelief. "You stabbed an alien warlord with scrap metal?" she muttered. Jason chuckled weakly. He wasn't expecting it. For a brief moment they laughed. But Jason's gaze drifted to the flames still flickering behind the window. He knew this wasn't over. Krozkan was still alive, and Earth's greatest threat still lingered. Jason Kane sat in the cockpit of their stolen freighter, his arm hastily bandaged from the gash Krozkan had carved into him. The pain throbbed, but it was nothing compared to the rage still boiling inside him. Sasha sat nearby, her fingers dancing over a keyboard, eyes locked on a flickering screen filled with alien symbols. She mumbled curses to herself, occasionally smacking the console like a stubborn vending machine. Borges, his bruised face set in a grim expression, cleaned his rifle with methodical precision. Dr. Lyle sat furthest away, clutching a data pad as if holding onto it for dear life. "We're not finished," Jason muttered. The words seemed to hang in the air like smoke. "No kidding," Sasha shot back without looking up. "Krozkan's alive, and the ship's half burnt. We barely made it out." Jason clenched his fist. "He's still planning something. My father knew it." Sasha finally paused and sighed, rubbing her eyes. "Yeah. I know." She tapped the screen again, and the display shifted to a series of schematics, a tangled mess of wiring, pipes, and security protocols. "I managed to pull this before we fled. Krozkan's flagship is carrying something big, some kind of device called the Extinction Protocol." Jason felt his stomach drop. "What is it?" "That's the problem," Sasha said. "I don't know. It's buried deep in Dravik code, but from what I can tell, it's a weapon. And not just a bomb or some big laser, this thing is designed to wipe out entire planets." Dr. Lyle, normally timid, spoke up with an urgency that caught everyone's attention. "If the Extinction Protocol is active, Earth won't survive. Not unless we stop it before they reach the firing point." Jason's mind raced. He knew Krozkan well enough to understand what this meant. The Overlord hadn't murdered his father out of arrogance alone, he'd done it to silence Victor Kane before the truth could reach Earth. Jason stood up, his fists trembling with renewed determination. "We're going back," he said. "Back?" Lyle's voice cracked. "We barely survived last time. We won't survive if Earth gets turned into space dust," Jason shot back. Borga stood, grabbing his pack of explosives. "I say we finish this. Once and for all." Sasha groaned and threw her hands up. "Oh sure, let's just break into an alien warship twice like we're running errands." But her sarcastic grin betrayed her agreement. The plan came together faster than any of them expected. Sasha discovered a supply vessel scheduled to dock with Krozkon's mothership within hours. Using hacked credentials, they would slip aboard as crew, then bypass the guards and infiltrate the chamber holding the extinction protocol. Lyle built jamming devices to disable the ship's internal alarms, giving them a brief window to act. Boarding the Dravik supply vessel was surprisingly easy. The Dravik soldiers were careless, barely bothering to check their forged documents. The team moved swiftly, hiding among cargo crates as the ship docked inside the Devourer once again. The air inside was thick with oil and metallic fumes, the ship's massive corridors echoing with guttural alien commands. Their first obstacle came unexpectedly. Just as they passed through the loading bay, a towering Dravik guard halted them. His armor gleamed with crimson markings, a symbol of rank. His reptilian face twisted with suspicion as his sharp claws hovered over his weapon. "Show me your authorization," the guard growled in broken English. Sasha stepped forward, faking a cheerful smile. "We're here to deliver minerals," she said quickly, holding up a forged datapad. "Top priority. You know how your boss gets when shipments are late." The guard's eyes narrowed. He snatched the pad from her hand, inspecting the data. "This is wrong," he muttered. Jason's heart pounded. He reached slowly for his pistol, but before he could draw it, Sasha suddenly screamed, pointing at something behind the guard. "Oh my God!" she yelled. "Is that a fire?" The Dravik spun around just in time for Borges to slam a metal crate across the back of his head. The soldier crumpled to the floor with a heavy thud. "I'm starting to like you," Jason muttered to Sasha. They moved quickly, navigating the maze of corridors. Sasha's jammers worked flawlessly, blocking security feeds as they moved deeper into the ship. Eventually, they reached the core chamber. The air inside hummed with electrical energy, and in the center stood the extinction protocol. The device was monstrous, a metallic sphere twice the size of a car, surrounded by coils of wiring that crackled with unstable energy. Glowing red symbols etched into the metal pulsed like a heartbeat. Lyle's face paled as he stared at the device. "This thing, it's not just a bomb," Lyle whispered. "It's worse." "What do you mean?" Jason demanded. "It doesn't just destroy a planet," Lyle stammered. "It shatters gravitational stability, destabilizing the entire orbit. The planet, everything on it, just gets crushed or flung into space. We need to blow this thing sky high," Borges growled. As they moved closer, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Krozkon's voice rang out, sharp and cruel. "You insects never learn." The Overlord emerged from the shadows, flanked by armed guards. His armor gleamed, the scars from their last encounter still visible on his side. His twisted grin widened. "I was hoping you'd return," Krozkon sneered. The room erupted in chaos. Borges roared and opened fire, forcing the guards to scatter for cover. Sasha darted to the console, frantically typing in codes to override the protocol's controls. Jason found himself face to face with Krozkon once more. The Overlord lunged with a wicked blade, slashing wildly. Jason dodged, barely avoiding the strike. His injured arm throbbed as he tried to parry Krozkon's relentless assault. Sasha cursed loudly. "I can't shut it down!" "Then we destroy it!" Jason shouted. Borges tossed Jason a detonator charge. Jason hurled it at the protocol's core, the explosive attaching itself to the device with a magnetic click. Krozkon snarled, slashing again, this time grazing Jason's side. Blood soaked his shirt, but he gritted his teeth and pressed the detonator trigger. Nothing happened. "It's shielded!" Lyle shouted. "We need to disable the generator first." Jason turned, spotting the shield generator across the room. The console's power core glowed bright blue. Borges sprinted toward it, weaving through enemy fire. Just as he reached the console, a Dravik soldier tackled him. The two struggled violently, rolling across the floor. Jason charged after them, pulling his knife and stabbing the soldier in the back. Borges, panting, slammed his fist into the generator's controls, shattering the device. The shield flickered and died. Jason turned back to Krozkan, their eyes locking once more. "This isn't over," Krozkan growled. "Yeah," Jason muttered. "It is." He pressed the detonator again. This time, the explosion engulfed the protocol, fire roaring across the chamber as the force knocked everyone to the floor. Smoke filled the air. Alarms wailed. Jason stumbled to his feet, coughing, and looked back at the wreckage. Krozkan was gone. "We need to move!" Sasha shouted. The smoke still clung to Jason Kane's clothes as their stolen freighter sped away from the burning wreckage of the Dravik mothership. The extinction protocol was destroyed, and the Dravik Empire's flagship was in flames. But despite the victory, Jason couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in his gut. Krozkan was still alive. The Overlord had vanished in the chaos, and Jason knew better than to believe that was the end of it. The Dravik warlord wasn't the type to retreat without a backup plan. Sasha slumped in her chair, exhausted. Her fingers twitched as they hovered over her console. "We should celebrate," she muttered half-heartedly. "I mean, we did just blow up a planet-killing weapon." Jason barely heard her. His mind kept replaying the final moments before the explosion. He remembered Krozkan's twisted smile, the way the Overlord's gaze had locked with his just before disappearing into the smoke. "We're not done," Jason said quietly. Borges, bruised and battered from the earlier fight, grunted in agreement. "That scaly bastard's not finished with us." His massive frame shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Krozkan always has a backup plan." "Always." Dr. Lyle's voice trembled. "We barely survived this time. If he's planning something worse..." Jason clenched his fist. "We need to find him before he strikes back." Sasha groaned, rubbing her eyes. "And how exactly are we supposed to do that? Just ask politely? Excuse me, ruthless alien overlord, would you mind telling us where your secret lair is?" Jason ignored her sarcasm. "We have one shot at this. Krozkan will be running low on resources after what we just pulled. If we move fast, we can catch him before he regroups." Lyle stared down at his datapad, scrolling through intercepted Dravik communications. "I might have something," he murmured. "There's a transmission. Short, scrambled, but it's coming from a Dravik warship near the Orban asteroid belt." "That's him," Jason said without hesitation. "Plot a course." Hours later, their freighter crept through the dense asteroid field, jagged rocks tumbling dangerously close to their hull. Sasha navigated with uncharacteristic focus, her usual jokes absent. The Dravik warship loomed ahead, battered and smoking from their previous battle. Krozkan's vessel was clearly damaged, but Jason knew better than to assume the Overlord was vulnerable. They docked quietly on a damaged airlock, sealing the hatch behind them. The inside of the ship was eerily quiet. Emergency lights flickered along the walls, and the scent of scorched metal filled the air. Borges led the way, his massive rifle at the ready. They crept through the twisted corridors, bypassing flickering security systems and dodging patrols. Then they found it. In the heart of the ship's command room sat a reinforced terminal, glowing with alien symbols. Sasha wasted no time diving into the system, her fingers blurring across the console. This is bad," she muttered. "He's transmitting coordinates. Something big." Jason stepped closer. "Coordinates to what?" Sasha's face paled. "A weapon cache. Massive. Looks like a planetary-grade arsenal." Jason's stomach turned. He's planning to arm his fleet and strike Earth. Before Sasha could finish deciphering the data, heavy footsteps thundered down the corridor. Dravik soldiers stormed in, weapons raised. Borges fired first, his rifle spitting bolts of plasma that sent 2 soldiers sprawling. Jason grabbed Sasha's arm and dragged her away from the console as more soldiers flooded the room. Lyle stumbled after them, clutching his equipment. They fled down a narrow corridor, the sounds of boots pounding behind them. Borges turned and hurled a grenade, sending a shockwave that shook the walls. The pursuing guards fell back, giving them precious seconds to breathe. "We need to stop that transmission," Jason shouted. "I can't," Sasha yelled back. "Not from here. We need to reach their main comms relay." "Where is it?" "Deeper inside the ship," she groaned. "Because of course it is." They raced through the twisting corridors, dodging fire and scattering debris behind them to slow their pursuers. The comms relay room was heavily guarded. Dravik soldiers stood watch, and Jason knew they wouldn't be able to fight their way through. "Got an idea?" Jason asked Sasha. "Yeah," she said. "It's called Get Shot and Die." Jason gritted his teeth. "We'll need a distraction." Borges grunted, patting the explosive strapped to his chest. "I'll give you one." "Wait," Jason started, but Borges was already moving. The towering Dravik defector charged down the hall, roaring like a beast. The soldiers spun, stunned by the sight of one of their own species charging with wild fury. Blaster fire erupted as Borges detonated a series of grenades along the wall, causing sparks and debris to rain down. "Go!" Borges bellowed. Jason pulled Sasha and Lau forward, bolting toward the comms room while the chaos unfolded behind them. They burst inside the relay station, and Sasha immediately started working. Jason and Lau blocked the doorway, ready to fight if the soldiers returned. Sasha's fingers danced across the keys. "Almost there," she muttered. The ground shook violently, and Jason knew that Borges's efforts wouldn't last much longer. The detonations were ripping through the ship's structure. Metal groaned, and lights flickered as systems began to fail. "I got it!" Sasha cried. "I cut the transmission!" Jason let out a breath of relief. "Now let's get out of here!" They raced back through the burning corridors, the floor shaking beneath their feet. The bulkheads groaned as fires spread through the ship. As they neared the exit, they found Borges slumped against a wall, bleeding heavily. He coughed, flashing a bloody grin. "Got most of them," Borges wheezed. Jason knelt beside him. "Come on, we're getting you out of here." Borges shook his head. "No time. Get out before the ship blows." "I'm not leaving you," Jason growled. "You'll die trying," Borges said with a weak smile. "I've been ready for this for a long time." Jason clenched his jaw, anger and sorrow mixing in his chest. "You're a stubborn idiot," he muttered. Borges chuckled. "Yeah. I know." Jason stood slowly. "We'll finish what you started." "You'd better," Borges said. "Now go." The ship groaned, metal screeching as the fire consumed the lower decks. Jason grabbed Sasha and Lyle, dragging them toward the airlock. They sealed the door just as a deafening explosion shook the entire vessel. Through the view window, they watched as the Dravik warship split apart, fragments spiraling into space. Jason slumped back in his seat, breathing hard. Sasha sat beside him, eyes wide and glassy. Lyle stared down at his hands, shaking. The weight of Borges's sacrifice hung heavily over them all. Jason knew they had stopped the transmission. They had delayed Kroskon's attack. But the Overlord was still out there, and Jason knew the war wasn't over. Earth was still in danger. For now, though, they had survived. And survival was enough to fight another day. The silence in the freighter's cockpit felt suffocating. The flickering lights of distant stars filled the view window, but no one seemed to be watching. Jason Kane sat in the pilot's seat, shoulders slumped and face set in grim determination. His sides still ached from the deep slash he'd taken in the fight with Kroskon, but the pain barely registered. His mind kept returning to the image of Borges slumped against the wall, grinning faintly with blood trickling down his chin. The Dravik defector had given everything to ensure they could escape and stop the transmission. Now he was gone, and Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't won, not really. Sasha sat across from him, unusually quiet. She kept tapping absent-mindedly at her console, scrolling through system logs that no longer mattered. Lyle was in the corner, tinkering with damaged equipment, his hands moving in jittery, nervous bursts. No one spoke. The weight of Borges's absence seemed to linger in the air like smoke. I should have stopped him, Jason muttered suddenly, his voice low. Sasha glanced up, her face hard. You couldn't. I could have. Jason snapped back. I should have. He made his choice. Sasha interrupted firmly. He knew what he was doing. Jason clenched his fists, trying to ignore the burning frustration clawing at him. Borges had been stubborn, yes, but Jason couldn't shake the feeling that his sacrifice had been unnecessary. If they had moved faster, if Jason had thought of another plan, maybe he could have saved him. We still have a problem, Lyle muttered from his corner. Jason turned toward him, grateful for the distraction. What now? I've been reviewing the data Sasha pulled, Lyle said. Stopping that transmission helped, but it wasn't just a weapons cache Krozkan was after. He's gathering something else, materials, resources. I think he's building something bigger. Jason's stomach tightened. Bigger than the extinction protocol? Lyle swallowed hard and nodded. Much bigger. Jason stood and paced the cockpit, frustration mounting. He's not going to stop. He's desperate now. That means whatever he's building, it's going to be his final move. He's cornered, Sasha added quietly. And cornered monsters are the most dangerous. Jason knew she was right. Krozkan had lost his ship, his extinction protocol was gone, and much of his remaining fleet was in disarray. But the Overlord's pride wouldn't allow him to walk away. He would strike again, and this time he wouldn't make mistakes. Jason knew that whatever Krozkan was building, it would be powerful enough to end everything. We need to find him, Jason said. Fast. Lyle tapped his datapad again, scrolling through incomplete files. I think I have a lead. There's a signal, faint, but it's moving toward a system near the Sereth Nebula. It's isolated, far from trade routes, a perfect place to hide. That's him, Jason said. Plot a course. Hours later, their freighter approached the isolated moon where the signal had led them. The planet's surface was cracked and jagged, its atmosphere stained with thick red clouds. Scattered debris from crashed ships littered the landscape. Krozkan's warship stood in the distance, heavily damaged but still functional. The faint glow of energy emanated from a nearby structure, half buried in the rocky terrain. Jason knew what it was. He's building something inside, Jason muttered. We end this tonight. They moved carefully, using the wreckage for cover as they approached the structure. The air smelled of ozone and scorched metal. Sasha hacked the security panel at the entrance, her fingers moving with practiced precision. The door hissed open, revealing a dimly lit corridor lined with alien carvings and glowing wires that pulsed with unstable energy. The deeper they moved inside, the louder the hum became. It wasn't just machinery, the sound seemed to vibrate through the walls, filling the air with a low, menacing growl. At the heart of the facility stood a towering device, jagged and twisted, with glowing veins of red light coursing through it like blood. It was unlike anything Jason had seen before. Pulsing conduits stretched from the machine, reaching deep into the rock like roots digging into soil. This isn't a weapon, Lyle whispered. It's a power core, a planetary disruptor. He's planning to shatter the planet itself. Before anyone could respond, a voice echoed from the shadows. You just couldn't leave well enough alone. Krozkan stepped into the light, armor scorched and cracked, yet his presence still radiated power. His twisted smile returned as he drew a wicked blade from his belt. You destroyed my ship, Krozkan growled. You murdered my soldiers. And now you've come here to die. Jason raised his rifle, but Krozkan was faster. The Overlord lunged, his blade slashing the barrel in half before Jason could fire. Jason barely managed to dodge the next strike, rolling to the floor as sparks sprayed across the room. Sasha scrambled toward the disruptor's controls, desperately trying to override the system. Lau backed her up, fumbling with wires as energy arced dangerously across the console. Jason dodged another slash, swinging a metal pipe at Krozkon's head. The overlord barely flinched as the blow struck his armor. Jason staggered back, barely keeping his balance. Krozkon's blade swept low, cutting across Jason's ribs. Pain erupted, but Jason gritted his teeth and pushed forward. "You're weaker than your father," Krozkon sneered. "He begged for mercy. You'll do the same." Jason felt his anger boil over. He lunged, grabbing Krozkon's wrist and forcing the blade away. With his other hand, Jason slammed a jagged metal shard into the overlord's side. Krozkon roared in pain, staggering back as dark blood dripped down his armor. Sasha screamed from across the room. "Jason, we can't stop the countdown!" Jason's heart sank. The disruptor's core pulsed faster, its light growing brighter. Krozkon staggered toward the console, his bloodshot eyes wide with rage. "If I die," the overlord snarled, "I'll take this world with me." Jason grabbed Sasha's explosive charges from her pack and bolted for the core. He could feel the heat radiating from the unstable energy, the pressure making his skull throb. He planted the charges along the glowing conduits, arming each one as Sasha shouted frantic warnings. Krozkon lunged at Jason again, but this time Jason was ready. He dodged low, spinning behind the overlord and driving his knife deep into Krozkon's back. The overlord's snarl turned to a guttural choke, his twisted grin fading as he crumpled to the floor. "Now!" Jason shouted. Sasha triggered the detonator. The charges erupted in a blinding wave of fire and smoke. The disruptor's core imploded, tearing through the facility with a deafening roar. Jason barely managed to grab Sasha and Lyle before the shockwave slammed into them, hurling them through the collapsing corridor. They stumbled out onto the rocky surface just as the entire structure caved in behind them. The warship crumbled in the aftermath, its engines rupturing in a massive fireball. The air shook as flames roared into the sky. Jason dropped to his knees, coughing and gasping for air. Sasha collapsed beside him, clutching her arm, while Lyle lay flat on his back, too stunned to move. "We did it," Sasha whispered. The sky above Earth was clear and peaceful, but for Jason Kane, there was no comfort in it. He sat on the worn steps outside his father's home, the old house that now seemed quieter than ever. The victory over Krozkon should have felt like triumph, yet it sat in his chest like a cold stone. The war was over, but the cost still lingered. Borges was gone. His father was gone. And Jason couldn't stop wondering if the future they had fought for would even be what his father had envisioned. The front door creaked open behind him, and Sasha stepped outside. She didn't say anything right away, just dropped into the seat beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee. Jason took one silently, still staring at the horizon. "You've been sitting here for hours," Sasha said softly. "Just thinking," Jason replied. "You know, when most people say that, they're usually thinking about something productive," Sasha muttered, her voice attempting to sound casual but unable to hide her concern. "I'm just trying to make sense of it," Jason said. "Everything feels off." Sasha took a sip of her coffee, giving him time to continue. Jason ran his hand over his face, sighing deeply. "I thought when we killed Krozkon, that would be it," Jason said. "I thought I'd feel, I don't know, relief." "You're still breathing," Sasha said. "That's something." Jason shook his head. "I can't stop thinking about what happens next. Krozkon's gone, but someone's always waiting to fill the void. Someone always wants power. Maybe the next warlord won't come right away, but they will eventually." Sasha set her cup down on the step, folding her arms. "You sound like you're expecting the worst." "I'm expecting the truth," Jason muttered. They sat quietly for a while. The air smelled faintly of smoke, remnants of distant fires still being extinguished after the chaotic aftermath of the Dravik fleet's collapse. News reports celebrated Earth's victory, calling Jason and his crew heroes. But Jason knew better than to believe the story was finished. Lyle eventually joined them, his steps awkward and hesitant. He looked exhausted, eyes sunken, face pale. Jason didn't need to ask how Lyle was feeling. They were all dealing with the same weight. Lyle stammered, shifting uncomfortably. I finished going through the data we pulled from Croscon's network. There's something you need to see. Jason's heart sank. Tell me. Lyle handed him a small tablet, the screen flickering to life. Rows of alien text scrolled past, incomplete symbols and fragmented code. Jason couldn't understand most of it, but the image on the screen spoke for itself, a fleet. Not just warships, but massive transport carriers and heavily armed frigates. It wasn't an invasion force, it was an exodus. They weren't just building weapons, Lyle said grimly. Croscon was moving resources and people. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Civilians, soldiers, entire outposts packed into these carriers. Jason's brow furrowed. He was retreating? Not exactly, Lyle said. It's more complicated than that. They weren't just fleeing, they were regrouping. He was shifting his people to a new system, something far away, isolated. They weren't just survivors, they were loyalists, diehards who believed in his rule. They're still out there. Jason let out a slow breath. So this isn't over. Not even close, Lyle muttered. Sasha rubbed her temples. I knew this was too easy. There's always someone else. Jason set the tablet down and stood up. His gaze drifted back to the horizon, the warm glow of a distant sunset painting the sky. He knew Earth's leaders would see the victory as final, a neat, simple ending to a messy war. But the truth was far uglier. Croscon's death didn't erase the damage his empire had done. The survivors would regroup, and sooner or later they'd return, with new leaders, new weapons, and a new plan to finish what their overlord had started. Jason knew there was only one thing left to do. We have to find them, Jason said quietly. Sasha's head snapped up. You're serious? We can't just wait for them to come back stronger, Jason said. We need to find them before they regroup. Lyle's face paled even more. Jason, we barely survived the last fight. We're lucky to be alive. I know, Jason said. But if we wait, the next attack will be worse. We have to stop it before it happens. Sasha stood and walked a few steps away, dragging her hand through her hair in frustration. This isn't our fight anymore, she muttered. Earth won. The war's over. We're supposed to be done. Jason turned to her. You really believe that? Sasha didn't answer right away. She just stared at the sky, as if searching for answers among the stars. After a long pause, she sighed. I hate that you're right. Jason gave a faint smile, but it didn't last. The weight of what they were about to do settled heavily on his shoulders. He knew they wouldn't get another lucky break. They were battered, tired, and outnumbered. But waiting for the enemy to strike again wasn't an option. The next morning, they met with Earth's leaders, a collection of politicians and military officials who were all too eager to celebrate their victory. When Jason explained what they had learned, the reaction was predictable: disbelief, doubt, and frustration. We have intelligence indicating that Croscon's forces are regrouping, Jason said firmly. They aren't gone. They're preparing to strike again. A suited official leaned forward, voice tight with skepticism. Earth's defenses are stronger than ever. We'll be prepared. Jason shook his head. They're planning something bigger. If we wait for them to come to us, it's going to be too late. An older general, face lined with battle scars, finally spoke. You want to go out there and hunt them down? Yes, Jason said without hesitation. The general studied him for a moment. You'll be on your own, he said finally. Earth's military isn't going to chase ghosts across the galaxy. Jason didn't expect anything different. I wasn't asking for an army. I was asking for permission to leave. The general grunted. You won't need it. If you're crazy enough to go, I won't stop you. Just don't expect a warm welcome when you come back empty-handed. Jason didn't answer. He just turned and walked out of the room. Sasha and Lyle followed closely behind. Later that night, they stood aboard their battered freighter, preparing for the journey ahead. Sasha sat at the console, adjusting navigation charts. Lyle quietly calibrated their aging engines. Jason stood at the viewport, watching Earth slowly shrink in the distance. I thought this would feel different, Sasha muttered. Leaving Earth behind like this. Jason didn't look away from the window. We're doing what has to be done. Sasha managed a smile. Yeah, but you're still crazy. Jason smiled faintly. I know. For the first time in weeks, he felt something close to peace. Not because the danger was gone, it wasn't. But because they weren't waiting for it to strike. They were moving forward, carrying the fight to the enemy before the enemy could destroy what was left of their world. Jason reached into his pocket and touched his father's journal, still tucked safely inside. His father's final words echoed in his mind. If this fails, there's only one way to stop them.